She felt the first bullet tear through her shoulder. The second shattered her leg. The third, she lost count, but her finger never left the trigger. The morning mist clung to the Afghan mountains like a burial shroud, thick and cold, wrapping around the rocky outcrops where Staff Sergeant Maya Chen had been lying motionless for over 14 hours. Her ghillie suit blended perfectly with the dried vegetation and stone, making her invisible to the naked eye. Through her scope, she watched the valley below where her team was preparing for the most dangerous extraction of their deployment. Maya had earned her position as the unit's primary sniper through sheer determination and an almost supernatural ability to remain calm under pressure. At 28, she was already a legend among the special operations community, known for shots that defied physics and patience that outlasted desert storms. Her chocolate-brown hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail beneath her camouflaged cap, and her green eyes held the steady focus of someone who had never missed when it truly mattered. Her spotter, Corporal Jake Morrison, lay 3 feet to her left, scanning the terrain with his binoculars. Morrison was a young soldier from Texas, barely 22, but he'd proven himself reliable under fire. Maya trusted him with her life, and more importantly, with the lives of her team members below. "Overwatch, this is Ground Team Alpha," crackled through her earpiece. The voice belonged to Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, a veteran operator who'd been running special missions since before Maya had enlisted. "Beginning approach to target building. Request eyes on potential threats." Maya's voice was barely a whisper as she responded, maintaining the discipline that had kept her alive through 3 deployments. "Copy, Alpha. I have visual on your route. Clear for approach, but I'm tracking movement in the eastern ridge. 2 tangos, possibly more." Below them, a 4-man team moved like shadows across the barren landscape. Their mission was simple in theory, complex in execution. Extract a high-value intelligence asset from a compound that was crawling with hostile combatants. The asset was a local informant who had provided crucial information about planned attacks on coalition forces. But his cover had been blown, and enemy forces were converging on his location. Maya's job was to keep her team alive from her perch 800 meters away, high on a rocky outcrop that provided perfect overwatch of the entire valley. She'd been in position since before dawn, having climbed through treacherous terrain in complete darkness to reach her hide site. The wind shifted slightly, and Maya adjusted her breathing, feeling the familiar weight of her rifle against her shoulder. The Barrett M82 had been her companion for 3 years, through dusty Afghan valleys and Iraqi rooftops. She knew every bolt, every scratch, every subtle vibration it made when the shot was perfect. The weapon was an extension of herself, as natural as breathing. "Movement, 2 o'clock, Morrison whispered, his voice tight with concentration. "Approximately 600 meters. Maya swung her scope right, tracking smoothly until she found them. 3 fighters moving along a goat path, weapons ready, clearly aware that something was happening in their territory. They moved with the confidence of people who knew the terrain intimately, but they weren't expecting a sniper at her elevation. She could see the leader pointing toward her team's position, gesturing to his companions. "Ground Team Alpha, be advised, you have company coming from the east. 3 individuals armed, ETA to your position approximately 8 minutes. Rodriguez's voice came back immediately, professional despite the stress. "Copy, Overwatch. Can you neutralize?" Maya calculated distance, wind speed, elevation difference, and the subtle effects of mountain air density. The shot was difficult, but well within her capabilities. She'd made harder shots under worse conditions. Affirmative, engaging. She controlled her breathing, feeling her heart rate slow to the methodical rhythm she'd trained herself to maintain during crucial moments. The crosshair settled on the lead fighter's center mass. She could see his face clearly through the scope, a bearded man in his 30s, Probably a local commander based on how the others deferred to him. Maya exhaled slowly, held it at the natural respiratory pause, and squeezed the trigger with the pad of her index finger. The rifle barked, its sound echoing off the valley walls, and through the scope, she watched the target drop instantly. A clean shot, center mass, no suffering. The other two fighters immediately dove for cover behind rocks, but Maya was already tracking the second target. She could see his muzzle flash as he fired wildly in her general direction, the bullets falling far short of her position. Another controlled breath, another squeeze of the trigger, another target down. The third fighter panicked, breaking cover and running back up the ridge toward higher ground. Maya tracked him through her scope, but let him go. Sometimes fear was more valuable than eliminating every threat. Word would spread that there was a skilled sniper in the area, making other enemy fighters more cautious. 2 down, 1 rabbit, she reported calmly, already scanning for new threats. For the next 40 minutes, Maya provided overwatch as her team moved through the compound. The target building was a traditional Afghan structure, 2 stories of mud brick with a flat roof and small windows. Intelligence indicated that the asset was being held on the second floor, but getting to him meant clearing multiple rooms filled with hostile fighters. Maya eliminated 2 more threats during the approach, her shots precise and clinical. A fighter appeared at a second-story window with an RPG, and she dropped him before he could fire. Another tried to set up a machine gun position on a nearby rooftop, but Maya's bullet found him before he could get the weapon operational. Everything was proceeding according to plan until the radio crackled with sudden urgency. Rodriguez's voice carried a tone Maya had rarely heard from the veteran operator. Genuine alarm. Overwatch, we have a problem. Intel was wrong. This isn't just a safe house, it's a major staging area. We're looking at 20+ hostiles, and they know we're here. Maya's jaw tightened as she swept her scope across the compound. Through various windows and doorways, she could see muzzle flashes erupting from multiple buildings. The enemy had been lying in wait, had probably known about the mission in advance. Her team was walking into a carefully prepared ambush. "How copy, Alpha?" she radioed, though she could already see the situation deteriorating rapidly. "We need immediate extraction, but the LZ is hot. Can you clear a path?" Maya began scanning the building systematically, looking for targets of opportunity. The enemy fighters were using guerrilla tactics, popping up from behind cover, taking shots, and then disappearing before she could acquire them. She began working methodically, watching for patterns, anticipating where targets would appear next. A fighter exposed himself at a window for just a fraction of a second, but it was enough. Maya's shot shattered the window frame and eliminated the threat. Another target appeared on a rooftop, and she dropped him before he could bring his weapon to bear. One by one, her shots found their marks, but there were too many enemies and not enough time. But then something changed. The enemy fighters had apparently located her general position because suddenly the rocks around her began exploding as high-powered rounds struck them. Maya pressed herself lower against the stone, feeling sharp fragments pepper her back through the ghillie chute. "They've got a bead on us," Morrison said, his voice tight with concern. "Multiple shooters, eastern slope." Maya could see muzzle flashes from at least 4 different positions scattered across the opposite ridge. The enemy had deployed counter-snipers, and they were good. Really good. Professional marksmen, not the usual insurgent fighters. This was a coordinated operation, planned well in advance. She watched as a bullet struck the rock inches from her head, sending sharp fragments into her left cheek. Maya wiped blood from her face and repositioned slightly, trying to find an angle that would give her shots on the enemy snipers while minimizing her exposure. "Overwatch, what's your status?" came the desperate call from below. Rodriguez's team was pinned down behind a low wall, taking heavy fire from 3 different directions. She could see them through her scope. crouched behind inadequate cover, return fire becoming sporadic as they conserved ammunition. Maya wiped blood from her face and repositioned slightly. Still operational. Keep your heads down. She found the first counter-sniper in her scope, a figure barely visible behind a rocky outcrop 400 meters away. The shot required her to expose herself more than she liked, rising slightly to clear the rocks in front of her position. But her team needed the help, and hesitation would get them all eliminated. Maya shifted position, lined up the shot carefully, and fired. The target dropped immediately, but at that exact moment, she felt something punch into her left shoulder with tremendous force. The impact spun her partially around, and white-hot pain exploded through her body like liquid fire. She'd been shot. Maya gritted her teeth, fighting off the wave of nausea that followed the initial shock. Blood was already soaking through her ghillie suit, running warm down her arm and chest. She could feel the bullet lodged against her shoulder blade, but somehow it had missed the major arteries. Lucky, but she was still losing blood fast. Maya! Morrison had seen her get hit. His young face was pale with shock. How bad? Operational, she gasped, though she could feel her left arm going numb. The shoulder joint wasn't responding properly, making it difficult to maintain her shooting position. She switched to a right-handed shooting stance, using her rifle's bipod for additional support, since her left arm wasn't functioning normally. Through her scope, she found another sniper position and fired. The shot went wide. The pain was affecting her concentration more than she had expected. Maya took a deep breath, centered herself the way her instructors had taught her, and fired again. This time the target fell. Overwatch, we're moving to secondary extraction point. Can you cover our movement? Maya looked down at her team's position and felt her heart sink. To reach the backup landing zone, they would have to cross 200 meters of open ground with minimal cover. They would be completely exposed, vulnerable to fire from multiple directions. It was a shooting gallery, and they would be the targets. But they had no choice. The primary LZ was completely compromised, covered by enemy machine gun positions that made landing impossible. If they stayed where they were, they would eventually be overwhelmed by superior numbers. Copy Alpha, beginning suppressive fire. Move on my signal. Maya began firing as fast as she could acquire targets, providing covering fire that kept enemy heads down and weapons silent. She could see her team beginning their movement, Rodriguez in the lead, the others following in a tactical formation that provided mutual support. That's when the second bullet found her. The medic found her scope fogged with her own breath, her uniform soaked in blood. How long has she been hit? 6 hours, sir. She never stopped firing. The second round tore through her right thigh, and Maya couldn't suppress the scream that escaped her lips. The bullet had struck the large muscle group, sending shock waves of agony through her entire leg. She could feel warm blood pooling beneath her, soaking into the rocky ground and mixing with the dust. The leg went instantly numb, then began burning like molten metal had been poured directly into the wound. Maya realized the bullet had probably nicked the femoral artery, not a complete severing, or she would have bled out in minutes, but enough damage to create serious blood loss. Morrison started to move toward her, abandoning his observation post, but Maya stopped him with a sharp command that cut through his panic. Stay in position. I'm still operational. But she wasn't sure that was true anymore. Her vision was starting to blur around the edges, and she could feel her body temperature dropping as blood loss began taking its toll. Every movement sent waves of agony through her wounds, but her team was still moving across that deadly open ground, still depending on her covering fire. Maya repositioned her rifle, using her good leg to brace herself against the rocks. The pain was incredible, beyond anything she'd experienced in 3 combat deployments, but she'd been trained to compartmentalize it, to function despite physical trauma. Mind over matter, her drill sergeants had called it, though they'd never imagined anything like this. She found another target in her scope, an enemy fighter setting up what looked like a mortar position behind a stone wall. Maya squeezed the trigger, but the shot was slightly off-center due to her compromised position, still effective enough to eliminate the threat, but not the surgical precision she was known for. "Ground Team Alpha, how copy?" she radioed, though her voice sounded strange even to her own ears. Weaker, strained, with an undertone that spoke of serious injury. "We're taking heavy fire, Overwatch. Multiple contacts from the northern buildings." Maya shifted her aim and found the source of the problem. 3 fighters had positioned themselves behind a low wall, taking turns popping up to fire at her team. They had good tactical discipline, never exposing themselves for more than a fraction of a second or two. Maya waited patiently, controlling her breathing despite the pain, until one of them exposed himself for a fraction of a second too long. Her shot took him down instantly. But the effort had caused her shoulder wound to open wider, and she felt a fresh surge of blood. Her ghillie suit was now completely soaked, and she was beginning to shiver despite the heat of the day. Classic signs of shock setting in, her medical training told her. She was losing too much blood, too fast. The remaining 2 fighters behind the wall had learned from their companion's mistake. They were being more careful now, coordinating their fire, never exposing themselves predictably. Maya would have to wait for them to make an error, but time was running out for both her and her team. That's when the 3rd bullet came, without warning. Maya felt it punch into her lower abdomen, just below the edge of her armor. This one was different, deeper, more ominous. She could feel something important had been damaged internally, organs shifting in ways they weren't supposed to. The pain was different too, not the sharp agony of the previous wounds, but a deep, spreading ache that suggested serious internal damage. She tasted copper in her mouth and realized she was bleeding internally as well as externally. Her body was failing rapidly now, multiple systems beginning to shut down from trauma and blood loss. By all medical logic, she should be unconscious, should be dying. But her team was still in that killing field, still depending on her. Morrison saw her take the 3rd hit, saw the way her body jerked and twisted from the impact. "Maya, you need medical attention now. You're bleeding out." "Negative," she gasped, though speaking was becoming more difficult. Blood kept filling her mouth, making her words sound wet and distorted. But staying was becoming increasingly difficult. Her vision was tunneling, the edges going dark as her brain tried to conserve oxygen for essential functions. She had to focus intensely just to keep the scope image clear, and had to fight against the growing darkness that threatened to swallow her consciousness. Through her scope, she watched her team reach a slightly better defensive position behind a concrete retaining wall. They were safer now, but still not clear. The enemy was regrouping, bringing more fighters from other parts of the compound. She could see them moving through the buildings, trying to flank her team's position and cut off their escape route. She adjusted her aim with movements that were becoming increasingly unsteady. Her hands were shaking now, fine motor control deteriorating as blood loss affected her nervous system. She found a fighter who thought he was concealed behind a wooden door and fired. Maya's shot punched through the thin wood and dropped him. Another target appeared at a 2nd-story window, and she eliminated him as well, though the shot took longer to line up than it should have. Each trigger pull was becoming more difficult, requiring tremendous concentration to overcome the pain and blood loss that were systematically shutting down her body. "Overwatch, we need immediate extraction. Can you cover our movement to the LZ?" Maya looked through her scope toward the landing zone.
It was 200 meters of completely open ground with absolutely no cover. Her team would be totally exposed for at least 90 seconds, an eternity in a firefight. She would need to suppress multiple enemy positions simultaneously to give them any chance of survival. Copy Alpha, on my mark, move fast and don't stop. Maya began systematically engaging every enemy position she could identify. Her shots were no longer as precise as usual. The blood loss was seriously affecting her fine motor control and depth perception. But they were still effective enough to keep enemy heads down and weapons silent. She fired until her rifle was empty, then reloaded with hands that were beginning to shake violently. The simple action of changing magazines, something she'd done thousands of times in training and combat, now required enormous concentration and effort. During the reload, enemy fire began concentrating on her position again. The counter-snipers had repositioned and were bringing increasingly accurate fire to bear on her rocky outcrop. Bullets struck the rocks around her with growing precision, sending up sprays of stone fragments that caught her face and hands. They had definitely pinpointed her location now, and more shooters were being brought to bear against her position. Maya realized with clinical detachment that she was probably going to die on this mountainside, but her team still needed time to reach the extraction point. A fourth bullet caught her in the side, just below her ribs, spinning her partially around and causing her to lose her grip on the rifle momentarily. The impact drove her against the rocks, and she felt ribs crack from the force. This wound felt different, deeper, more serious. Maya could taste blood now, could feel it running down her chin as internal bleeding worsened. Morrison was beside himself, torn between his duty to spot targets and his desire to help his team leader. "Maya, you're hit bad. We need to get you out of here." "Not until they're clear," she managed to say, though speaking was becoming increasingly difficult. Each word required tremendous effort, and she was having to pause frequently to cough up blood. She repositioned herself again, though every movement was agony now. Through her scope, she could see her team halfway to the landing zone, still taking fire from multiple directions. Rodriguez was limping. He'd been hit in the leg but was still moving. The others were providing covering fire, but they were running low on ammunition. Maya continued engaging targets, though her shots were becoming less accurate as her condition deteriorated. She was operating on training and willpower now, her body running on fumes. Her hands were shaking, her vision was blurring, and she was having trouble maintaining consciousness. But she kept firing. The fifth bullet struck her in the back, just below her right shoulder blade. Maya felt something important give way inside her chest, and suddenly, breathing became much more difficult. She was probably bleeding into her lungs now, she realized, with the detached analysis of someone who'd been trained in battlefield medicine. "Overwatch, we're at the LZ. Helicopter inbound, 2 minutes." 2 minutes. Maya just had to hold on for 2 more minutes. She could do that. She'd endured pain before, had pushed through physical limits that should have stopped lesser soldiers. 2 minutes was nothing. Except she couldn't feel her legs anymore, and her vision was going dark around the edges. And there was so much blood that her rifle was slipping in her hands, the metal stock becoming slick and difficult to grip. Maya forced herself to focus, drawing on reserves of willpower she didn't know she possessed. Through her scope, she could see enemy fighters moving to positions where they could engage the helicopter with rocket-propelled grenades and heavy machine guns. She couldn't let that happen. Her team needed those 2 minutes. She began firing at every muzzle flash she could see, working to suppress the entire compound. Her shots were wild now, accuracy compromised by blood loss and system shock, but the psychological effect was still significant. Enemy fighters dove for cover, their rate of fire decreasing markedly as they tried to avoid the sniper who refused to die. But the effort was costing her everything she had left. Maya could feel herself slipping away, consciousness fading like a tide going out. She fought against it, knowing that if she passed out now,
Her team might not make it to the helicopter alive. A sixth bullet found her, though she barely felt it at this point. Her nervous system was shutting down, going into shock from massive blood loss and multiple traumatic injuries. She was dying, and she knew it with the clarity that sometimes comes at the end. "Helicopters on the ground," came Rodriguez's voice over the radio. "Loading now." Maya used the last of her strength to shift her aim toward a group of fighters who were setting up what looked like an RPG launcher. The weapon could bring down the helicopter, could still turn victory into disaster. She fired, saw the shot go wide, and chambered another round with hands that barely functioned. Her vision was fading now, darkness creeping in from all sides, but she could still see the target through her scope, could still make the shot that would keep her team safe. Maya fired again, and this time she hit something important because the entire group scattered in panic. "Lifting off now, Overwatch. Thank you." Maya tried to respond, but no sound came out. Blood was filling her mouth, making speech impossible. She could hear Morrison calling her name, but it sounded very far away, as if he were shouting from the bottom of a deep well. Everything was getting dark and cold. She let her head rest against the stock of her rifle, still keeping her finger near the trigger in case anyone approached her position. Through fading vision, she watched the helicopter disappear over the ridge, carrying her team to safety. Rodriguez, Morrison, and the others, all alive because she had refused to abandon her post. Maya had done her job. They were alive because she had refused to seek medical attention, refused to let pain and blood loss stop her from protecting them. It had cost her everything, but they were going home to their families. As consciousness finally slipped away, her last thought was satisfaction that her team had made it. She'd kept faith with the warrior's code that had guided her through 3 deployments: leave no one behind, complete the mission, never quit fighting. Morrison stayed with her, applying pressure to her wounds and calling desperately for medical evacuation. He'd never seen anyone take that much damage and continue fighting. Maya had been shot 6 times, was bleeding from multiple internal injuries, and had probably lost half her blood volume. By all rights, she should have been unconscious hours ago. But somehow, impossibly, she was still breathing. Barely, almost imperceptibly, but breathing. The medical evacuation helicopter arrived 23 minutes later, the pilot taking enormous risks to land on the rocky outcrop where Maya lay dying. As the flight medic began working on her, checking vitals and starting IV lines, he asked Morrison the question that would haunt him for years. "How long has she been wounded?" Morrison looked at his watch, then at Maya's blood-soaked form. 6 hours, he replied, his voice hollow with exhaustion and awe. She took the first hit 6 hours ago and never stopped firing, never stopped protecting the team. The medic looked at Maya's wounds, then at Morrison with complete disbelief. 6 bullet wounds, massive blood loss, signs of severe shock and organ damage. 6 hours? With injuries like this? That's medically impossible. Morrison just shook his head, watching as the medical team worked frantically to stabilize Maya's failing vital signs. "You don't know Maya. Impossible isn't in her vocabulary." During the helicopter flight to the field hospital, Maya flatlined twice. Both times, the medical team managed to revive her through aggressive resuscitation, though her condition remained critical. The flight medic later told colleagues it was the worst case of battlefield trauma he'd ever seen in 15 years of military medicine.
At the field hospital, it took a team of surgeons 8 hours to stabilize Maya's condition. They removed bullet fragments from 6 different locations, repaired damage to her liver, lung, and intestines, and performed emergency procedures to stop internal bleeding that should have been fatal hours earlier. Dr. Sarah Chen, the lead surgeon, and no relation to Maya despite sharing the surname, had never seen anything like it. The amount of blood loss alone should have rendered her unconscious within an hour, she told the medical team during post-operative briefings. The fact that she remained conscious and operational for 6 hours with these injuries, it defies medical explanation. Maya spent 3 weeks in intensive care, fighting for her life as infection, organ failure, and complications from massive trauma threatened to finish what enemy bullets had started. During her recovery, word of her actions spread throughout the military community like wildfire. The 4-man team she had protected testified in detailed after-action reports that without her covering fire, none of them would have survived the extraction. Rodriguez himself visited Maya's bedside as soon as she was conscious enough for visitors. Maya, his voice thick with emotion that the veteran operator rarely showed. "What you did out there, there aren't words for it. You saved all our lives." Maya, still weak but alert, just nodded slightly. Speaking was difficult with her damaged throat and lungs, but she managed to whisper, "That's the job." But it had been much more than just doing her job. Maya had pushed human endurance beyond its theoretical limits, had continued fighting when her body should have shut down completely, had prioritized her team's safety over her own survival in the most literal way possible. It was the kind of heroism that gets written about in military history books and studied in leadership courses. The official after-action report documented Maya's actions in the clinical language of military bureaucracy. Staff Sergeant Chen maintained overwatch and provided covering fire for approximately 6 hours while sustaining multiple gunshot wounds. Her actions directly enabled the successful extraction of friendly forces. But the men she saved knew the real story. They knew about the blood pooling beneath her rifle, about the way her voice had grown progressively weaker with each radio transmission, about how she had continued engaging targets even when she should have been medically evacuated hours earlier. They knew that Maya Chen had redefined what was possible when everything was on the line. 3 months later, Maya stood at attention in a dress uniform, her left arm still in a sling as a general pinned the silver star to her chest. The citation read, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action while serving as sniper team leader during combat operations against enemy forces."
Maya had recovered from most of her physical wounds, though she would carry scars for the rest of her life. The psychological impact was harder to measure. She'd been forced to confront her own mortality in the most immediate way possible, had felt herself dying by degrees while still fighting to protect others. In her acceptance speech, Maya was characteristically brief. "I was just doing what any soldier would do, protecting my team." But everyone who heard those words knew they weren't true. What Maya had done went far beyond normal duty, far beyond what could reasonably be expected of any soldier. She had redefined what was possible when courage met impossible circumstances. Years later, Maya would become an instructor at the Army's premier sniper school, passing on her knowledge and experience to a new generation of marksmen. She never spoke about the details of that day in Afghanistan, but her students could see something in her eyes that commanded absolute respect. During training exercises, when students complained about discomfort or minor injuries, Maya would simply look at them and say, "Pain is temporary. Mission failure is forever." It became an unofficial motto of the school, though few students understood the depth of experience behind those words. Maya had learned that lesson in the most profound way possible, bleeding on an Afghan mountainside while refusing to abandon her post. The lesson she taught wasn't just about marksmanship or tactics. It was about something deeper, about the bonds between soldiers, about duty that transcends self-preservation,
about finding strength you never knew you had when others depend on you. Maya Chen had become more than just a sniper. She had become a symbol of what was possible when someone refused to quit, no matter the cost. And that legacy would inspire soldiers for generations to come.